Hi everybody. So this video is about federalism, and federalism is the style of government that the Founding Fathers created when they wrote the Constitution. And so the Constitution itself created a new form of government, okay? Got my handy pocket Constitution. Always keep that nearby. The concept of federalism was one that would divide power. So under British rule, the king and the parliament had power over the people. They had absolute authority. And that was something that the founders did not want to include in this new governing document. And so what they decided to do was to spread the power out. They wanted to give power to different branches of government at different levels. And so what the founders did when they created federalism was to create a system that divides power. Some of the power is at the national level, some of the power is at the regional level. In the United States, this is called, these are the state governments. So some power is at the top level, some power is at the next level where the state governments are. And so they did that by dividing what's called sovereignty. And sovereignty refers to ultimate governing authority. So everybody has a certain amount of sovereignty over themselves. So I chose to wear a green shirt today, okay? I chose to put my hair part way back today. Those are little things, right? But those are decisions that I made because I have ultimate governing authority over myself in terms of decisions that I make, in the day-to-day living of my life. But sovereignty at the governmental level refers to where the ultimate governing authority is going to be vested. And traditionally, in governments of the day, the sovereignty was vested in a person, in a king, okay? And you can see the root word, if any of you took Latin in high school. I did not, but we can still see the root word. Reign, R-E-I-G-N, is in the middle of the word sovereignty, and a king was the one who was sovereign. We still call people who are kings or queens sovereigns, and that meant that they would say, hey, everybody, God told me that I get to be in charge, so you have to do what I say or I'll cut your head off. Okay, it's a pretty good racket if you can get away with it. But the founders did not want to do that, and that is because sovereignty can have certain challenges. If you have absolute power, often corrupts absolutely. You may be familiar with that phrase. And so what the founders did was to divide the authority, divide that sovereignty, first at two levels, at the national level and at the state level. And then there are further divisions within those different levels. So the federal government has three branches of government. There is the federal executive headed by the president, okay, and then that includes all of the cabinet members, the vice president, and all of the various executive agencies. The legislative branch, and that's the Congress, okay. Within the Congress, sovereignty is further divided. Within the lower house, the House of Representatives, and the upper house, the Senate, and then the court system headed by the Supreme Court of the United States. So that is one way of preventing too much power being concentrated in one particular area. The states also have their own governmental setups, and now by and large they have permission to set up their governments how they wish, as long as they maintain what's called a Republican form of government. And a Republican form of government does not refer to the political party. It means republic. They have to create a style of government in which the people have a say. In our case, elections. Okay, but every state has set up their state government in a similar way to the federal government. You've got an executive branch headed by a governor, a legislative branch headed by a general assembly or a state legislature, and then a state court system headed by a state Supreme Court. So sovereignty is divided and different powers are given to different levels to prevent too much authority from being collected in one particular level. That's the goal of creating federalism. And the founders designed federalism by combining different elements of two different styles of government that existed at the time. Unitary was the most common of like the old European powers at the time. In a unitary government, all the power's at the top. Okay, so one person or one group makes all the decisions. The other style of governance at the time was called a confederal government, sometimes called a confederate government. And the United States, from the Revolution to the time that the Constitution was written in 1787, had a confederal style of government under the Articles of Confederation. That was our first governing document. Unfortunately, in a large area, confederations tend to go very, very poorly. And that's because in confederal governments, all the power is concentrated at the local level. And so you get a very disjointed, a very separated nation if it's in a very large area. And so what the founders did was combine elements of unitary and confederal governments to create this system of federalism. Which is really cool. A lot of countries around the world have copied our version of federalism and made it their own, which is really neat. We don't have a lot of things that are uniquely American because we're only a couple hundred years old. I mean, China's been around for thousands of years. They had, like firecrackers long before we were even a thing, so that's cool. They invented algebra. Thanks. So there are different kinds of powers included in the Constitution. The Constitution itself is the bedrock on which federalism rests. The sovereignty that I mentioned earlier, instead of being vested in a person, is vested in a document. It's brilliant. A document's not a person. It cannot be corrupt. The Constitution is supreme because we believe the Constitution is supreme. Okay? So as long as it lasts, then that sovereignty is vested in this document. And that sovereignty is divided out in the Constitution itself via a few different types of powers. Enumerated powers, those are sometimes called expressed powers, means the same thing. Enumerated, let's go back to the Latin root word, N-U-M-E-R, numer. That would be what we would say number. Now, so these are powers that are numbered out. They are expressly written in the Constitution. They are very clear and they are not in any way challenging to understand. So if you have a copy of the Constitution, it's in your textbook, take a look at Article 1, which deals with the powers of the Congress, Section 8, okay? And Section 8 has the enumerated powers of Congress listed therein. This is a lengthy list of things that Congress can do, and it is very clear and not hard to understand. To establish post offices and post roads. Cool, Congress has that authority. Not a problem. To coin money, regulate the value thereof. Okay, fantastic. So these things are typically not of concern when we are dealing with constitutional challenges or when people feel their rights have been violated and the Constitution is not being upheld. It is usually implied powers, and that is where you end up with the challenges. How is federalism interpreted? Okay, so Congress has the authority to coin money. Cool. Is Congress actually, or members of the House and the Senate, actually going down to the Federal Reserve and to the Department of the Treasury to literally run the machines that make the money? No, they are not. That's not specifically listed in the Constitution. That's not an express power. An implied power is that Congress has the authority to establish an agency to practice that expressed power. Okay? And so it's when you start to go beyond expressed powers that usually you run into challenges because people interpret the Constitution in different ways. If there are 30 people in a room, you're going to have 30 different interpretations. The necessary and proper clause is a really, really cool part of the Constitution because it provides authority for Congress in a way that is both enumerated and implied at the same time. So the necessary and proper clause, it's part of the listing we were just looking at of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And it states that Congress shall have the authority to pass all legislation as they deem necessary and proper. Okay. Expressed, all right, Congress gets to pass legislation that they find necessary. Implied, well, what's going to be that legislation? What is it going to become? And so that's the implied part. And so there are some really cool constitutional arguments, and this is where you really get into interpretation, is through those implied powers. Reserved powers are ones that are not specifically listed in the Constitution. That means they are left over for the states. And so all of these different types of powers together, how we interpret them and how we interpret the Constitution in a changing world, are a really, really cool different set of patterns. And I'll talk about those in videos on the changes in federalism.